Well, hello everyone. I have to say, we have had the most phenomenal response to this webinar, with registrations when I last looked about 2 minutes ago being 503 people. I mean, wow. It seems that everybody wants to know the secrets behind being audacious and bold with content. And frankly, I'm not surprised. Even a small amount. Oh, right, I should tell you, I'm Katie Howell. I run independent social media agency Immediate Future, and we work with well-known brands, but at the point that they're truly serious about social media. In other words, they want business value from their Instas, TikToks, and tweets. I've wanted to do this webinar for some time because our mantra at Immediate Future is to break the social boring, and it's all about impact. In other words, how to grab audience attention. But brands are really fighting at the moment for attention because, over the last 12 months, I'm just not going to mention that word, pandemic. Oh, I've mentioned it, damn. Social media has increased by over 40%, and even the boomers are twittering and posting in their feeds. So you need your content to sing loudly and be seen. And it seems easy, doesn't it, when you see amazing content, to assume that it was simple to create, that it only took some bravery, but really big budgets and a bunch of digital natives. But of course, that is never the case. Anyone who's ever actually created killer content knows the truth, and it isn't easy. It's not straightforward. There is no magic formula, and you will fail as well as succeed, because there is so much more to it than just having an idea. So I'm delighted to welcome two smart, creative and brave marketeers. Firstly, Auto Traders UK Head of Content and Social Media, Laura McNally. Hey, Laura. Waving back. And McDonald's Director of Digital, Karl Boyce, who I've known for years. Hello, Karl.
Hi, Katie. Hi, everyone.
So just before we crack on with the questions, we've got about 45 minutes for a really proper chat, and I've got some really gnarly questions to ask Karl and Laura. But please do also add questions in on the Q&A or on the chat. And we did a poll just before we started this, asking attendees what they were looking to find out. And brilliantly, you want to find out everything. You want the advice, you want examples, you want lessons learned. So we'll get cracking. So let's start. Laura, let's start with you, and then Karl, if you can answer this. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourselves and share what it means to you to be brave and bold with your content.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Laura. As Katie said, I look after content and social media for Auto Trader. Before that, I ran the global social channels for Red Bull. And then before that, I was agency side with the Kate Group doing content strategy on social accounts there. That's now part of the Havas Media Group. And then I suppose I first cut my teeth socially, actually, with Red Bull again, but on the Red Bull racing team. So as part of their Formula One team. In terms of what I think it means to be bold, I think it's taking risks outside of what your competitors are doing. I think it's at some point making a decision to stand by the courage of your convictions, because when you are being bold, you need to know that you're never going to have 100% buy-in. And at some point you need to make a call on that. And taking risks, I guess, more than anything, it's about taking risks and being, I guess, mindful that as long as your rewards can outweigh those risks as your bottom line, then you're in a good place to forge ahead. You're on mute, Katie.
I'm mute, Katie. That's the first mention of the day. Won't be the last.
No.
Sorry, do you want me to?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. So hi everyone. I'm Karl. So as Katie said, Director of Digital at McDonald's. I've actually been in the business a year last week, which has been a pretty interesting year, very different year to start a business, but feel very fortunate to be in a brand like ours, and we've done an awful lot of in that space. So basically, my team kind of look after all the customer-facing digital channels you come to expect at McDonald's, as well as CRM and all our performance channels as well. So yeah, and before that, I was head of digital and CRM at Domino's. Always kind of been in food and pubs. That's what I love. I was in Morrison's before that, the agency side before all that, etc. So that's kind of me. So kind of being bold creative content for me is stuff that, you know, I guess the mantra around it is to be as resilient and true to yourself as much as possible, you know, so it should excite you when you're about to post or a campaign's going live, you should be feeling a little bit anxious about it. That kind of comfort zone should be testing you. So I think that's a good sign of something you want to do. As Laura said, it has to stand out for your competition. It has to stand out, I think, from your own feed as well. So I'm kind of constantly looking back at some of our content and looking to see whether these campaigns actually have stand out compared to all the rest of the content that you tend to do as well. And you know, the great sign of things is if it's got great shareability, great talkability, that's what it's all about. But shareability is probably one of the big things that's part of most of the briefs I've been involved in. If it nails that, then I think you're into a good place. You're mute again, Kitty.
I just won't mute it. You'll just hear me clicking away occasionally while I write a note or two. So both of you have created really amazing campaigns that have grabbed audience attention. So I think it's worth kicking off with you sharing examples. I don't know if you want to start, Karl.
Yeah, I've got a couple. I think I was kind of, you know, thinking about this and was going, well, you know, there's probably more bold campaign creative ideas on the cutting room floor, to be honest with you, than there is that I've actually led the light of day, and that's for good reason. You know, I might share one or two of those a bit later on and so on, as long as anybody doesn't tell anybody that we were going to do that. I'll trust you all. But yeah, a couple of things as I think back at kind of to Domino's. One of the big things that we were really after was thinking about how we could stand out amongst new product launches and so on. And you know, our kind of view was in the past that, you know, our product had to really sing, and a lot of the content we were doing before wasn't particularly optimized for social firsts. It was the kind of black slate background. It wasn't ownable necessarily compared to some of the other pizza operators. So we took a really different approach when we launched our cheeseburger pizza. So it was the official food of WTF, and I remember having some very interesting conversations with our American friends about whether that was appropriate or not for some of our campaigns. But we did a couple of things really differently on that. We actually put the brief out to a load of food bloggers to do the photography for it instead of any kind of proper food photography agency. So we gave them basically a studio for a day and a half. We had 5 people come in and do a load of shots for that, and we picked our best from the back of that. So it really basically delivered real social first content. We got animators behind it all, and then obviously we had the kind of the WTF piece around it. So I was really proud of that particular campaign because it's a very different way of launching product, and that's been carried through from Domino's really ever since. But even small things like the royal baby was being born at that time, so we announced it in advance in a kind of official kind of letter in that sense, and that got a load of engagement as well. So that's certainly something I really like. The work we did, McDonald's, when we reopened, so Return of the Mac, you know, that is really that ad. It was obviously across multiple channels, was a socially curated ad in that sense. You know, our customers in their tens of thousands were telling us we had to come back with Mark Morrison, Return of the Mac, and we did. And I think that's great examples, I think, of listening to customers, letting them curate the content in some way with the ideas, and reflecting that. So those are two of my favorites for sure.
There's something beautifully both in the moment and pop culture about that, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's getting it's really old-fashioned word, but getting old-fashioned word. See, getting the zeitgeist right, you know, catching that kind of wind of what's going on. It's definitely feels like that's the spark that sits behind it.
For sure. So, I think the big thing for me is, you know, reflecting this as well is how contextual you are. I think that's probably got to be the right up there. So if you've got that great mix of having a campaign or a product plan, whatever it may be, that just engages a particular contextual moment, that is the Holy Grail, isn't it? And if you're able to react to that quickly, then you're on to a massive winner.
Is it the same for you, Laura?
Yeah, so I would, I guess, use one example from Red Bull, where there are 800 athletes within the Red Bull network, which most people probably aren't aware of, that there's that many. And we were really keen to try and profile them and show more of their characters in a human and relatable way, because I think there was this kind of disconnect between the can, them and what they were achieving versus kind of someone that admires what they do and could still benefit from use of the can. So we were keen to put them in a cooking scenario. So they would be at home in their kitchens and be cooking, and they didn't need to be fancy meals. You know, it could be like they were doing a cheese and ham toasty if they wanted, just something that would allow people to engage with them. And we invited people through a live stream to suggest alternative ingredients. But it took a really long time to get that one across the line. I think internally there was a lot of nervousness around the idea that, you know, can is king. Why on earth would we want to move into food? So kind of helping them to understand that, you know, cooking was very culturally relevant, that it would have a character profiling impact. And so we went to shoot the pilot with a BMX athlete called Matteo Standois in his flat in Paris. And it was very real, very authentic. You could see the amount of interactions that it invited. And from there, we were able to carry on have the length of time it can take to put in on the idea. So sometimes it feels, I guess, even more like you've achieved something bold when you do manage to do that. The issue that we had with it was that because of the nature of athletes' schedules and the fact that their training is so strict and things like that, we weren't able to commit to like a regular posting frequency, which was okay. On a live level, it was fine. We would do it when we had availability. Often they'd be in hotels or like rented apartments where you didn't get the kind of true flavor of them being at home in there, you know, because then when something was cooking, they could go and show some trophies or what have you. But we would take a VOD asset of the live version and house them all together on an area of redbull.com. So that I would say was one, just because it was the first time that we'd really ventured outside of the can territory in that way. And then the work that we did with you guys last year. So during the pandemic, we did a piece called This Is Not a Drag Race. And we were really keen to do something bold and different and to reach a younger demographic. So to reach new audiences and younger audiences with a kind of revised way of looking at cars. So we did a piece that looked at how you would test a car, but in very different context to what most people would be used to seeing. So we incorporated drag queens as a play on words of the drag racing that you would traditionally expect within automotive versus bringing the drag queens into, and they had to apply their makeup in the back of the car while Rory was ragging it around a racetrack. And it was very true to who we were. I think we've got a very active LGBTQ guild at Auto Trader, and we're very values driven. We sponsor Manchester Pride every year. So it felt like a very natural connection in that regard. But obviously it was very bold. And we knew that, you know, these hardcore petrol heads, you know, not all of them are going to love that kind of integration. So I think that was a real doing so bold and being prepared, as I said earlier, to stand by the courage of our convictions that it was the right thing to do.
And it is about courage, isn't it? It's really interesting that the thing that comes across most is the kind of courage to put things on the cutting room floor, but also to go out and stand out. And actually that brings me on to the next bit, because before we get into the nitty gritty of how we make this happen, I have to ask you, have you had your Weetabix today?
Because definitely not with beans on it, you know.
No, not with beans. Definitely not with beans. Well, because anyone on Twitter could not have failed to have seen this. Yes, this revolting tweet showing baked beans on Weetabix, and the subsequent sort of brand fan frenzy, sort of like a branter, whatever they call it, in what appears to be a collaboration with Heinz. They put this post up with, if you haven't seen it, with beans on Weetabix. So I guess my question is that, is it worth the revolting picture and collaboration just to get attention? Or do you both think, because you both joined in as brands, is this a smart long-term strategy to kind of drive volume or increase usage occasions? There's a lot of criticism that this is all a little bit about making a bit of fluff and fuss in social. I'd love to know what your thoughts are.
Go for it, Laura.
Okay, I'll go first. I think it's really interesting. It was funny yesterday because I'm still in a lot of WhatsApp groups with people that I used to work with in social media in previous roles and stuff. And it's always just quite interesting to get the gauge of comments in that space. So one of them said something along the lines of, can you imagine genuinely being excited to murk a breakfast cereal? So that was, that's one end of the spectrum. Someone else said it brought back PTSD from when we used to be in the newsroom and being forced to try and come up with these conversations with other brands. And I think when it doesn't work, it does look very desperate. And that's the thing, I guess you have no idea whether it's going to work or not. Obviously, in the Weetabix scenario, it's paid off with Heinz. But the reason we got involved, I think, is that I think it comes back to that kind of risk versus reward thing again. And I think the risk, which is basically that you get unfollowed, is not that huge, really. And I think in today's day and age, with the speed at which things move, it's actually quite unlikely that would happen as well. So as a way to raise the profile of your brand in a conversation amongst people that they would never really be in front of before, I think is definitely worth it. And that's why we would do it. I do think there's very much a case for being early. I think, we could have been earlier with ours. And if you've got the time to be creative in your response, that it's not just text and you've got a bespoke piece of media to go with it, all the better. But yeah, I'm kind of all for it when it works. And I think that is being bold, isn't it? You wouldn't want to do that every day. Then it's not standout, then it's not bold. But look how excited everyone got about it.
It brought that much needed joy, didn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, Karl, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think why not? To be honest with you, and I think end of the day, I think again contextually it felt quite right and stuff. We're all at home. We're all eating breakfast. We're all kind of thinking of different ways in which we can make this mundane week feel a little bit different one day to another. I'm sure there are some oddballs out there who have put worse than baked beans on their Weetabix over the last kind of couple of weeks. So why not? We all eat Weetabix. I'm sure it was and for them, to actually be part of a conversation at a key kind of daytime for them, I think was great. So why not? It's obviously becoming more and more of a kind of a fact and a role that kind of brands have, or a tactic brands have around Twitter. I'm not sure how tactical it is. I don't think we would be sitting there planning in a couple of months' time, we're going to go and do this and engage X brand to start a conversation on it. So it feels quite fluid and quite reactive. I'd be really sad if there's actually marketeers thinking about that in a couple of months' time. Who could I engage with? Because that's going to probably die on its backside pretty quickly. But I thought it was good. Again, a bit like Laura, we engaged on it. I think it went out about 9:30. I think it was. We were on at about 2:00 in the afternoon. It was kind of right in the middle of when we were launching 6 new products yesterday on the menu. So we were a bit late to the party, and in hindsight, should we have gone in? Maybe not. It's a bit too late. So I think you've got to be in the moment. You've got to have some really great content. I thought Auto Trader's content was actually really, really good. I thought Specsavers actually won it massively. With the kind of with the checking glasses and putting blindfolds on. I think they do amazing. I think Specsavers are the best. Them and Lidl, in terms of responding and these kind of Twitter conversations, they're the ones to follow. So yeah, has its moment, but not a planned piece of activity. But why the hell not? Especially in this.
Yeah. Exactly. As I said, bringing joy. So I love the fact somebody in the chat has put in hindsight. Sorry. I'm sorry. That has tickled me. Thank you, Kelly Symes. You've made me giggle. Now, I know there's some questions coming through. I will answer them, but I've got to ask that because both of you have really suggested something quite interesting, which is how planned can you be with this? It feels like it's a natural thing in the moment. So the reality is, can you have a strategic approach to make your content distinctive or bold? Is there, do you have to kind of plan it?
So I think what's really important, I don't think being bold and creative should be centered around one single campaign. So I used the product example we had at Domino's. We wanted something that was going to consistently lift our content away and be ownable with amongst our competitors around pizza, which is the same shape and a lot of the same ingredients in the end of the day. So we've got to make that stand out. But that's a constant kind of approach, and we decided to take a different approach for that and then run that all the way through our year, and also part of our planning. Obviously, when you come to a campaign brief, you're going to consider things like this about what's going to be the stuff that's going to be the kind of the finger stopping, kind of scroll stopping kind of content that you want to do. But as I say, I think from a social perspective, what is really landing, and I think it's even more important in these times at the moment, is stuff that's got real purpose, stuff that is really, really, really relevant. And I know that's a very obvious thing to say, But I said earlier on, getting that kind of golden nugget of being able to combine a campaign or a product launch with something contextual is an absolute winning combination. But a lot of it is, I think, reacting to what is going on in the day, what conversations are happening, and it's also why I think I might be a bit provocative saying this, is why I think comms orientated people and social specialists are the best at these kind of things, because they're linked into conversations. And that's really important. I don't think brand marketeers are brilliant at that, because they consider the kind of mid to long term planning. They're all about kind of the ongoing credentials and so on. They're very obviously sales focused and so on. So, and I include myself in that and stuff. So yeah, I think that's a bit of a waffly answer probably, Katie, but that's
no, it's brilliant. It's exactly what because it's a dual strand, isn't it? It's a combination of, yes, you need to plan, you need to know your purpose, you need to know your voice. You can't, otherwise you're just going to be all over the place like some sort of schizophrenic person jumping into this and that and the other. Nobody knows what you stand for. So you need your brand, but on the other side of it, you need people who are just looking at that data. I know that's how our team jumped on that fast yesterday, because they were looking at that through Brandwatch. What do you think, Laura? How do you plan for being bold?
I would agree with Karl. I think in a way it's probably not about, setting time aside to come up with one brave, bold idea. It's probably more, often the things that do the best for us, certainly that go viral or anything like that, are the ones that, didn't have that much thought around them, that were kind of very in the moment. I do think there's certain elements, I guess, that we would want to rationalize any kind of bold ideas against. So one would be, an element of research. So I go back to the drag race idea, but, we'd identified that, RuPaul's Drag Race was very popular in that demographic. So that was a reason that we wanted to play in that territory if we could find a relevant way. I'd say be data informed rather than data driven. So I guess that's the trade-off. If you're data driven, you kind of rule out innovation. Whereas if you're data informed, you can use that to kind of act as a good filter for bold ideas. And then I think instinct comes in as well a lot, and sometimes that's going to be right and sometimes it's going to be wrong. But I guess we wouldn't underestimate that. And then a real big one for Auto Trader is, and because they are very values driven as a brand, so always filtering it against our core values to make sure that it fits with those.
I so agree with you on instinct. I think it takes experience to be bold. We've got a raft of questions coming in. I'm just pulling them over here, which is fantastic. So Neil Heppelwhite says, can you identify any small brands with limited budgets which have created standout campaigns which have cut through and enabled them to punch significantly above their weight? It's a hard one, that one, isn't it? So I think there are some smaller brands. We might have to go away and think about that, because it's trying to remember off the top of your head. But there are some smaller brands that have done this. And although the budget is limited, they have invested in things that give them reach. Because if you haven't got reach in the first place, kind of getting noticed, no matter how great your content is quite a tough thing to do. But I think we might have to. Neil, I think we might have to think about that, because we probably, the three of us, don't think about the small left of centres.
I've got a couple, and the reason I'm trying to remember is I'm trying to remember exactly the name. I follow an awful lot of kind of different brewery brands, and I've seen some fantastic stuff, particularly around this particular period of time once we've been in lockdown, and I'm going to have to look through my phone in a second to find out exactly who it was. It's completely escaped me, but I do think it's possible. It's obviously going to be harder. I'm not going to lie around that. But one of the things actually is quite interesting around kind of how can you do kind of brave safely, and everybody kind of talks to me about kind of, you must have paid reach behind it in order to kind of really understand what's going on, get audience and stuff. But actually, McDonald's, we didn't spend a penny on Facebook or any Facebook channels last year, not one penny. All of our content was organic. Unless we got a big Facebook follower profile. But if I'm thinking about kind of being brave or opportunities to do that, why couldn't you test some of this stuff, particularly if you're dip your toe into this kind of area with just organic oriented content and stuff that, you know, could go wrong if it gets shared too much.
Exactly.
But at least we'll give you a bit of a view. You'll need that much engagement to kind of understand what the themes are coming through on that one and stuff. So yeah, that might be an option in terms of.
And a couple of people have suggested Brewdog, which was the one on when you said beer brands.
Their budgets are all right, I think.
Yeah, so. I think their budgets are quite high now, so it's a little bit,
brilliant.
A little bit extraordinary, but yeah.
There's one fashion brand. They're called AVAVAV that aren't huge, and they, I think, have just got an interesting approach where it's just very, very striking imagery they do with like very kind of, and it looks like, I don't imagine a lot of the shoots would have necessarily any budget at all, but they've just got a very clear identity in how they model the clothes, like just very quite obscure poses from the models. And I mean, the clothes speak for themselves as well. They're kind of quite out there, but I guess they've just found a formula there that while they're building themselves up, they're going to stick to, and I think it does work in grabbing people's attention.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think the crux of this is the ones that I've always seen do very well are the ones that actually know who they are. So they have this kind of very clear purpose, voice, or identity, and that works well for them. Jay Harper has asked whether or not at the end of this we'll see a partnership between Auto Trader and McDonald's. Bit of collaboration. Who knows?
Who knows? I'm up for that.
Trying to eat a Big Mac while racing around.
Well, yeah, they're a big drive-through brand. There's something in that. So
we've done that actually in a couple of our reviews. We went through, just to be really obscure, like go through in like the most insane supercar to the McDonald's drive-through and then try and pay with a money gun.
That's it.
We'll have to send that one to you. Stephen Lepetak, who a super serious journalist that he is, has asked us, brands having fun openly, is that not something we should see more through social? If so, why don't we?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I mean, I think if anything has again, I hate using the word pandemic and stuff. I think whether you're a person or a brand, I think being more open, transparent, and kind of being more in touch with your kind of purpose and so on is what it's all about. So I think this kind of anti-falseness is kind of coming through more and more. So yeah, I mean, our sentiment around McDonald's obviously the last year has been really, really different. We've always had a sense of, obviously, we're a deeply values driven kind of oriented brand, but no more so than the last 12 months. I think we've talked about our crew team, our staff. We've, in our emails even to customers, we've been open and transparent about the things that are concerning us and about how we manage this and stuff, and that's what it's about. So if in that sense, also having fun and not taking yourself seriously is what it's all about and stuff. And as you saw yesterday, with Weetabix, that's the stuff that people are going to be sharing and engaging on and stuff at the end of the day. So yeah, totally agree.
It's also quite dependent on the brand, because you can't always be funny. And I think there's if you are the kind of brand who can be, if you're the kind of brand who can have that voice or occasionally step out of it, as we saw with the NHS, for instance, yesterday, who did a brilliant post for the Weetabix thing. But the NHS being funny constantly might not be the right reaction. So I think it's understanding your basic personality. What is your brand personality, and then being able to take that out. I think that's
police force you can be. That's the other one I was thinking about as well, in terms of they have no budget whatsoever, any of those police forces, but they're doing some of the best content in terms of responding and so on as well. So definitely check some of them out as well.
Absolutely. So we've got loads more questions, but I'll come back to this because I want to ask a bigger question, which is the things that we never really talk about, which how do you challenge the status quo internally? So you'll have all worked with brands, I suspect, where you have to help the senior stakeholders understand why you want to do something so stand out.
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate at Auto Trader in that senior stakeholders are they kind of empower us to do bold and creative things. I think sometimes the challenges can be more with the people that are closer to your day to day. And I think it's about bringing the right stakeholders together at the right point in time. I think showing that you're listening to their concerns and acting on them. So as an example, I keep going back to the drag queens brief, but for example, there we kind of we listened to everyone's concerns, and then we came up with what we called was like a bulletproofed version of our deck, which kind of just showed that we had, you know, actively gone away and thought about the things that people were concerned about. And I think as long as you are actively listening and you are acting on those concerns, then you are setting yourself up for the best success possible. Of course, it doesn't guarantee that the content's going to work or that it's going to fly, or that people won't say "I told you so" at the end of it, if it doesn't. But I think that's one of the best things you can probably do to help in that regard. I think knowing your audience when pitching, so, you know, your pitch to devs for their support for a space on site, for example, would be very different to your pitch to the C-suite, but just knowing what's going to resonate and understanding what level of knowledge they have when it comes to social as well. You know, it can sometimes be easy when you're ingrained in that world every day to just assume that everyone gets you and is on the same page. So I think just being able to gauge your audience, and then empathizing with concerns as well. I think that can go a really long way. But ultimately, you kind of underpin with the awareness, as I mentioned earlier. But when you're doing something bold, you're never going to have as much support as you would for your BAU content. And that's, you know, you can't shy away from it because of that. So, yeah. And keep trying, I think, as well.
Exactly. Yeah, keep trying. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's often a kind of doing it in smaller steps all the way.
I think it's about, you know, the way we do it. And you think obviously working in a big corporate business like McDonald's is that you go through layers of governance and bureaucracy, and it actually isn't like that at all. And the reason why we have that is that we've got a pretty good idea of what the guardrails are that everybody's pretty comfortable on. So we know the things, but like Laura was saying earlier on, we know the stuff that we'll go for and the stuff where we'll completely avoid. And we've got to be really sensitive to that. As a business like McDonald's, got a huge amount of social responsibility with our customers. But what's really important is having a really clear, what we call a DAI structure. So we know who's got the end of decision, who has an advisory role, and who has an informed role. And as everybody's clear on that, then you're not going to have a cast of thousands inputting last minute and changing direction and so on. So it doesn't matter what it may be, whether it's reviewing social content, whether it's about a product plan, whether it's about a restaurant reopening, whatever it is, we have pretty clear viewpoints on all that. It is hard actually in a franchisee business, you know, because at the end of the day, I've got one CEO who's very, very good, but I've also got 200 other CEOs who are the franchisees across the McDonald's business. They all have opinions. They're all their businesses. So, and there's, I'll be honest, there's been times, not so much at McDonald's, but certainly at Domino's, where we've pushed it a bit, you know, where I've had some choice emails from franchisees going, "What the hell have you done here? Why have you done this?" You know, as I said before, we took pizza as a photography and changed it a little bit, not the classic, you know, stage pull, to being a little bit more kind of how food is actually properly eaten by customers. And a couple of times maybe we pushed it a bit too far, and I can understand that. But then you kind of explain to these people, and Laura said it, who might not be as close as to what are the things that are real success metrics around this. You know, looking at the engagement KPIs around it, not just things like CPA and others, and educate them that you know, set some benchmarks and say that this is what we're expecting to get out of this. This is what's responded. And take that feedback from and advice from it would be kind of my advice on that.
Yeah, and I think it's a challenge. It depends on every single organisation, but I'd say there are two things. One, I've known, you know, CMOs who've gone, "I'll ask forgiveness later. I'll just make it happen, otherwise it'll just never happen." And the other one is the washing and rinsing of a great idea as it goes through 100 different folds of seniority till what you have that comes out the end is so ghastly that you just hope nobody actually sees it. You know, that's the only way of putting it. So I think that there is a big challenge, and I also think there's a challenge in judgments. My next question is really, you know, how can you be provocative? You know, not everything is about humor, but actually how can you provoke debate without being so dangerously controversial? I'd like to go to you first, Laura, because, you know, you could have been seen as virtue signalling. I mean, the campaign you ran with the drag queens is a fine balance, and so I'm interested to know how you you approach that when you started thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think that was where I guess a lot of the concerns came from, you know, like we didn't want the use of the drag queens to be a flash in the pan. And for people that, you know, the work that we do around sponsoring Manchester Pride, for example, is probably much more widely known in Manchester, and the content was going out everywhere. So trying to rationalize that. But I think we kind of made an agreement with ourselves that if we lost followers, we were losing the types of followers that we didn't care about having on our channels, quite frankly. Like if they were bigots or, you know, whatever it may be, like we were prepared to take that hit in the name of doing something that does show where our brand is and what we stand for. I think the kind of the continuation is as important as the moment. So I think, you know, we'll definitely be looking at ways to integrate, you know, use of drag queens or the talent that we worked with before throughout our content going forward, so that it's not just kind of something that happened in isolation. And I think just finding ways to thread more of that activity that we're doing kind of behind the scenes, if you like, so that people are more familiar and more aware that that's what we're about. I do think you can be provocative without being dangerously controversial. So like what, you know, often our most engaged posts are the ones that are kind of an either or. So petrol or electric, BMW or Mercedes, like things like that we know are polarizing. We know they're divisive. They generate a lot of conversation, but they're not dangerously controversial. You know, they kind of play in the right territory. I think other brands could be, you know, more dangerously controversial on a daily basis. Brewdog, I think, you know, are probably a good example where they, you know, cut it quite close to the mark. But yeah, from an Auto Trader perspective, I think it's, like you say, just trying to bulletproof your ideas against all eventualities. So like the fact that, you know, virtue signaling could have been something that we were accused of. That actually didn't come through in the comments. We even had one comment from someone that said, as a gay petrol head, this is amazing. And I think even just for those isolated moments kind of really help to justify why you've done what you've done, you know. So yeah, that would be mine.
And very occasionally make us poor old beleaguered marketeers feel quite good about what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is kind of quite nice.
Everything else. Yeah.
I think you can be provocative. You know, honestly, if I'm being totally honest, I think I've worked in brands that we got to be really careful about that. So, you know, at the end of the day, we will avoid anything that looks, you know, socially or politically divisive in any way. We're not going to touch that. So, you know, talk about guardrails. There's no way we're getting into that, and we have to be, because we're, you know, taking across our customer group. You know, we're all things to all people, and that's really important part of that. That inclusivity is really important value for us. I think the key thing for me is you can be provocative, but you got to be able to back yourself up, as Laura said. You know, so authenticity is really important. So, you know, if you're going to go out there and do something that is, you know, I wouldn't recommend necessarily using social as the first vehicle for something that is potentially a step outside of our new value or new purpose or new goal in that sense, or new audience. That, you know, I would be looking at other partnerships probably in particular first, before I started potentially looking at how you magnify that on social channels. You know, how your staff, your crew teams, your single locations, whatever, also living and breathing those values as well. Because if you're not, you're going to get found out pretty quickly, and that's going to turn against you. You know.
Yeah, and it's where we see the biggest holes kind of appear. Let's answer a couple more questions around. So they're a little bit sort of scattered through some of the topics we've talked, but I think it's quite interesting. Katie De La Cruz has said, I love the Weetabix social media madness and ASOS versus Boohoo, and wondered if that's just a trust the team and get involved, or if behind the scenes there is an agenda between the brands to get going. What do you think?
I've not seen it being, I've done that before. It's not been a conversation that is being pre-planned. To the point we were making earlier on, I think people will see through that straight away. So say get the Holy Grail, it all lines up, your marketing calendar lines up with that contextual moment, that particular moment. Well, bloody hell, well done to you. You know, take it both hands, but it doesn't happen like that. And there's, you know, I would be really surprised if that moment from Weetabix was an overly planned piece. You know, I'd actually be gutted if it was, but it worked out.
I think when the brand started 5, 6, 10 years ago, maybe, when that thing became a thing, I think they probably were a little planned, a little more organized. But I'm with you. I think in today's day and age, I can't see why. I can't see why you would do that. It would come across as false, and we are suffering from a real trust problem across the board. It's not a social thing particularly, although that often leads the way. And we are skeptical. So as consumers, we look at what's being put out there and think, what the hell is going on? You know. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I'm doing bold and brave campaigns still gives me, and you mentioned this earlier, Karl, terrible butterflies. And I've been doing marketing for 30 years and set up Immediate Future 17 years ago. And yeah, every time we go out with a campaign, I can feel my stomach tighten. So I wondered, just on a really personal level, how do you deal with that? It's quite an acute amount of anxiety when you do go live with a campaign. I mean, it's so bad that sometimes when I publish things, I will hold my breath. Do you know what I mean? I'm literally holding my breath as I publish it because I'm so scared. How do you manage? And while you do that, I'm going to shut this blind because I'm just being blinded. So please carry on.
No. It's a really good question. I think it's really hard when you know that not everyone is bought in. That's just a hard thing. I think that's probably a human thing, that you want to be liked. You want everyone to think that your idea is a great idea, and just knowing that not everyone shares that vision is really hard, and it does induce anxiety, like you say. I think you can't let that derail you. So you have to say, strong of mind that you started at that point. So that's not happened along the way. That's where you started. So you've got to stand strong to the reasons and keep going back to the brief and why you're doing it. I think keeping an open and honest dialogue with your team throughout, and still, despite the anxieties, making sure that you create opportunities for them to learn throughout the process is really important as well. And I guess from like a personal perspective, just the usual things like meditate if it helps, drink loads of wine if that helps, whatever else it may be. And weirdly for me, and this sounds like such a shameless plug for Autotrader, but I do actually look at Autotrader a lot. And we looked into this once because a psychiatrist once said that he uses Autotrader. So a therapist is using Autotrader as his therapy. But there's something around mapping yourself onto things that are potential. So whether it's like a gorgeous car, or I guess Zoopla and Rightmove have the same impact, where you just kind of escape. And I actually find things like that are quite calming. I'm a weirdo. I love looking at old cars. So, but whatever, it works.
I absolutely love that. I've never tried that in my life. I am going to go and try that.
I don't know if the McDonald's app would have quite the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a total marketing geek in the sense, there's nothing that excites me more in kind of new campaigns going live. So I'm kind of with you in that, Katie. I think I'm a total obsessive with it. So campaigns are going live, I'm looking at pretty much every comment as they come in. So my data usage is pretty awful when campaigns go live. I just really, most of the time, thankfully, I'm just excited about what lands. I guess if you're at that balance of being too anxious, you got to ask yourself, is what you're doing the right thing? It shouldn't cause you major anxiety. Excitement, anxiety is probably a fine balance in that one. But I think the thing, the mantra for me is, when we've had this kind of situation before, is if I can get in the lift with my CEO the next day and he tells me what a car crash that kind of was, and I have a reason why we did it, which is pretty clear, then nobody can really have a go at you and stuff. And that's really important. So as long as you kind of got a bit of a defendable position as to why, then that's all right. I do sadly do a bit of a mates test quite a lot. So I stick stuff, if I think it's a wee bit dodgy, I'll stick in front of a couple of mates and get their opinion. They'll be brutally honest with you, not what your team or anybody else or your agencies want you to hear. So that's a pretty simple exercise for me. They'll definitely tell me what I think.
I'm with you. I do the same. Whenever I'm a bit anxious, whenever we do anything for Immediate Future, I run it past my kids because they're in their mid-20s, and I need someone to sense check that old Eni here has actually not completely become, the really embarrassing dancing dad somewhere, So it's just, I'm with you. I think it's a really, what really sums it up for me, Karl, is what you said at the beginning. If you don't feel the anxiety, then have you been bold enough? And then what Laura said, which is, as long as in your head you have the rationale and the robustness that sits behind this. And I think this is very crucial, because for many brands now, they are going to have to take this step into being more of themselves. They're going to have to be more of their personality, because that is what we want as consumers. We want that authenticity. But we want real brands. We want you to be your inside outside self. And that means that you're going to have to take some very brave steps, and that is going to build with it some anxiety for those that are in charge.
I think, Katie, as well, just, and a slightly serious point on it as well, is if you're in an environment that you feel as though you can't go away and test and learn, or you don't feel as though you've got permission to play, you're probably not in the right place. And I know that sounds a bit wishy-washy, but that's really important. You've got to foster environments where that can happen, and actually within kind of creative social spheres like this, no more so than those types of places. So yeah, and if your organization isn't quite there, then I think you kind of almost have to kind of take them on a journey in some way by creating a few guardrails, simple things like actually having a look at some of the competitive position you've got, looking at some of their data and their engagement figures to say what they're doing more on, and start to encourage, they see if those kind of, C-suite others are struggling to get their head around that might be a way of just bringing them on a journey. But you've got to have permission to play in this space. You know that more than anybody, Kate, I think. About
yeah. And I would say, somebody's asked a question, sorry, they haven't given a name, but sometimes I feel it's difficult to be bold and working in a B2B environment. Any advice on how you stand out, but in a good way? But before I, take your thoughts, I would just also add, by the way, I see some of the bravest activity coming out of B2B brands. And actually, they're damn good at test and learn. And it is a journey, because you mentioned that before, Karl, which is that you have to do, in a way, sometimes we have more creative freedom in the markets you were both in, in the businesses we're in, but sometimes you don't have that creative freedom in the same way. It's not natural. So what you do is you just play a slightly different game. You play a game of test and learn, which is move 2 steps forward, get everybody's buy-in, then maybe move 5 steps forward and frighten the living daylights out of them and try it again. But actually, I think you can be very bold in B2B.
I actually, so when I was the agency side, I used to right at the start of my career, I used to represent a window fabricating company called James Harcourt, which isn't around anymore. I think it's called something else. And we probably did more creative, bold, kind of orientated activity in that space than I've done in any of the major brands I've worked in. And the reason behind that, I think, is because B2B businesses and marketeers and that, they probably know their customer better than anybody else, because they've got a far clearer representation of who is purchasing their brands. Whereas you're working on a kind of B2C thing, you've got to be really careful about what different types of age profiles or cultures or whatever it is may respond to a particular piece of content. So yeah, we had a lot of fun actually in that space, and I'd love to do a bit more of that in some cases actually in the future. Maybe I'll go back to that, but yeah, I would definitely be giving it a go. And I think you've got a really great way of just being bold and creative, but with a clear understanding that your customer are going to resonate with it.
Absolutely.
I would add, actually, when we were agency side, we had standard life investments. And again, it was like, how do you get people excited on social about insuring their life, And YOLO was really big at the time. So we'd come up with Yoda, you only die once. So you may as well be insured. They didn't buy it, but I was like, it was a lot of fun, just to start pushing their thinking into bolder territories. And I think with the B2B thing, it's because it's unexpected, I guess it gives you a bit more license to, that you're already kind of going to be bolder in that regard. So I do think it's a playful territory.
Gosh, we are getting a lot of questions. So I'm gonna. There's quite a nice one from Jodie here, which is, what are the most important measures of success for big social campaigns that you run, and how do you track it?
Can I be really honest on this, actually? So I've gone through a massive journey around social kind of KPIs and what really matters. So, when I went into Domino's, obviously kind of ran our digital channels. So, things like CPA and others were the be all and end all. And I think we lost a little bit of our way by moving from this really kind of thumb stopping kind of content that grabbed people to actually being very, very performance based. So we did an awful lot of our DR, kind of proportion of DR versus kind of storytelling became far too imbalanced. So we were getting bloody awesome CPAs, better than I've ever seen. And we're driving great sales from the e-commerce process. A lot of people were ticking the box in that sense, but I think we were losing that kind of that real kind of customer engagement, and what really the values of what kind of Domino's is about, which sets it above those other pizza operators as well. And certainly I've learned that coming into McDonald's, and of course we talk about our products, but we certainly don't position things like CPA anywhere near as highly as what I would have done, and that was my fault. A couple of years ago, going into Domino's in that sense. So we still look at how the volume of engagements we get. We look at the sentiment a lot. That's kind of probably our key KPI around that. So not any jaw breaking or anything different than most you probably are all looking. And there's obviously tons of tools around that, but don't let people like if you're engaging with people like Facebook and others get you too sold on things like attribution modeling and all that kind of stuff. Your brands better than anybody. You can see an awful lot of that content yourself, and how that's being engaged with, and I think staying true to yourself in that sense is really important.
I think Mark Ritson has this very, I love this idea that he puts together. He calls it bothism, which is just a horrible term for it personally, but it's the brand metrics running alongside the performance metrics, and those are actually the two are very interesting, because if you go down, as you say, Karl, just performance, it's the race to the bottom. If that's all you're paying attention to, if you don't build brand, and in today's modern weird and wonderful Zoom screened world that we live in, is that we have got to build brand and build trust. Otherwise, nobody's going to click anyway. You just end up with this smaller and smaller pool till you're right at the very bottom of your funnel. So, but it is quite a challenge to bring back some of the older metrics that we used to use, like brand equity. I know I say that to some people and they have no idea what I'm talking about. And those kind of things that we did before it was digital and it was all just TV and print. Is it the same for you, Laura?
Yeah, I think it is. I was just going to say quickly on that point that there's an IPA case study on the AA actually that's an interesting one of what can happen when you don't pay attention to both, and it does become a race to the bottom. They were lucky; they managed to turn it around with the singing baby ad. But I think they kind of relied on the fact that they had these yellow vans on the road every day, and that was enough of a brand marketing job for them. When in actual fact it wasn't, and then lots of new competitors enter the market, and you're left. Kind of in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, I think success metrics, similarly, we kind of switched, like most people, I guess, from looking at followers and very focused on interactions. But I think in terms of being bold, it's often different. So, the key objectives for the drag race were around reaching new and younger audiences. I think the important thing is not to sort of change the rules of the game as you're playing it. So I think as long as you're very clear from the beginning that this is what you're looking to achieve. And sentiment, I totally agree with that as well. It could be 5 comments that make it worthwhile. But if they're powerful, then there's a lot to be said for sentiment.
How do you both manage failure? I mean, you touched a little bit on it, Karl, but with being bold comes the kind of bit where you just really screw it up or fall over your own feet. How do you deal with that? And how do you deal with that with your teams, who can often be maybe not as hard bitten as us old people, and they take it a little bit more personally?
Yeah, we're all habit, creatures that want to do the very best, and me more than anybody, I really take these things kind of personally. Me, Katie, I'm quite enthusiastic in that sense, but I think, and it's been properly tested over the last year, but creating a team with two really important values for me in terms of what the types of teams around this is resilience and curiosity. You know, and if you've got people who have got that in spades, then you'll be all right, because you'll, you know, and I say, going back to that point about kind of having a culture of test and learn, kind of feels really wishy-washy, but I really mean it. It's if you've got resilient, curious characters within that team, you're going to be delivering engaging content. You're going to be learning new things with each one. You are going to, with one of a better word, fuck up the odd time, but you know, you'll learn from that, and you'll do better the next time. And that I think having those two characters around that is fine. So we don't really reflect too much on failure, to be honest with you. In the roles certainly I've had before, it's all about kind of what do we learn from it and what do we do next. You know, and certainly the businesses around us haven't lingered in any of that at all. They've backed us and supported us and stuff. So if you've got the right environment around you, you'll be all right.
I would agree with that. Again, actually, curiosity is one of our brand values, and I think that really comes through in the social team, that they are a curious bunch, and that really helps in making sure that we stay bold. I think keep coming back to the why you're doing something, like that really helps to kind of make any potential onslaught more palatable. I think, you know, always think what's the worst that can happen as well. If the worst that can happen is that you get some people internally saying I told you so, you get some people externally that unfollow you, like, and they're not the ones that you wanted to be coming on the journey with you anyway, then your kind of baseline is really quite okay to move forward with. And I think one of the blessings as well, it's a double-edged sword, and it's like a blessing and a curse with social, but given it moves so quickly, of course that makes it more challenging to cut through when you want to be bold, but it also means that when it doesn't work out, it's, you know, today's news is tomorrow's fish and chip paper. And I think just, you know, cultivating a team, as Karl said, that recognizes that it's better to have, you know, it's like all those quotes that say things like, you know, better to have tried 10 bold things than to, you know, and two of them than to try one or not try any at all. That's probably the least succinct version of that quote.
I love that. Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I also love that. So just going back, because we're going to have to. I have so many questions queued up. I do apologise to all those people listening. I cannot get through all of these because we've got 3 minutes before we finish this, and I've got like another 25 questions. Oh no, 31 questions. But I'm just going to, before I call it to a close, I'm just going to say the award for the quote of the webinar goes to, drum roll, Laura McNally, for meditate if it helps, drink lots of wine if it helps. You know, we're going to go out with that on a quote card. Absolutely, categorically. Listen, both of you, thank you so much. I have a heap of questions that I've not been able to ask you. I think we could probably spend the afternoon talking about this, and people are clearly looking for some good advice. One of my colleagues has just said that they can pick up questions left over on the LinkedIn, because there's a lot of people asking very specific questions about whether or not they should be on Instagram and what key metrics they should do, and what if they've only got 3 people in the team and how they integrate with PR, which I haven't done because they're quite detailed questions, very specific. If you jump onto the LinkedIn chat, my team is actually there, and you can go and they'll help you. That's our job. We pay it forward, we'll help you out. So if you go onto LinkedIn Immediate Future, and you'll see the chat happening under the events page. So thank you both. You are utterly fantastic. We kind of got into some of the nitty-gritty. I'm glad we managed to surface as well some of the ways in which we feel and the emotional side of it. But it's so interesting because I'm delighted, of course, Laura, I know that one of your brand values is curiosity because it's one of ours. As you know, it also is courage, because you have to be brave, and collaboration. And it feels like you have both spoken a lot about those things that force you to work together in a way that means that you can be greater than the sum of its parts. And, you know, from thinking about pop culture and being in the moment through to context that Karl mentioned, through to having that voice and purpose that we need now. So a huge thanks to Laura and Karl for sharing and helping us do our content better, or just making us feel better about our content. And it's clear, if you want impact, then you kind of can't cut the corners. It feels that even when it comes to doing something brave, that is not cutting corners, The bravery is in being bold with your content. We have another webinar coming up later in March, so keep an eye out for it. For those that want more detail on how to manage social media, we run a live session on all the social networks every single Friday, where myself and lots of my team get up and talk about things like paid media, how to have a voice that's different on each channel, all the questions that I saw coming up. I just wondered, before we close down, Laura, Karl, do you have one kind of final thing to say to people who are trying to be bold?
I've thought of the quote that I was meaning to say that I meant before, and it's that we're better to die knowing we've tried to be bold than to live maintaining the status quo. So that would be my Jerry Springer final thought.
Lovely.
My piece of advice is, when you're asked a question like that, don't follow Laura McNally with think of something really, really profound. So I've not got a quote for you apart from but just be curious and have the courage of your convictions. You know, what could go wrong, you know. Well, actually a lot can go wrong, but just make sure, but not an awful lot, you know. So best of luck to you all with it. Hope it goes well.
Thank you both. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Hope we had fun this lunchtime, and see you soon. Bye.
Yeah, everyone. Bye.
Bye.